It all began with a whisper, a quiet, almost imperceptible murmur that swept through the halls of the palace, across dinner tables, and into the back rooms of tabloids. Did she really do it? People asked, their voices trembling with a mix of curiosity and fear. Did Meghan Markle, the woman the world had watched marry a prince, truly destroy the family from the inside? For months, rumors had swirled, wild and untamed, painting pictures so vivid and so scandalous that even the most skeptical observers couldn't entirely dismiss them. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And now, for the first time, Prince Harry himself was ready to speak. The stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just gossip. This was truth. Raw, unfiltered, and poised to shatter the carefully curated illusions of royal life. Imagine being born into royalty, surrounded by centuries of protocol, expectation, and public scrutiny. Every word you speak, every step you take, is measured, analyzed, and criticized. And then imagine discovering, behind closed doors, that someone you trusted, someone you loved, might have been orchestrating chaos, manipulating perception, and, in some ways, undermining the very foundation of your family. That was Harry's reality. For him, the whispers weren't distant, they were personal. They tore through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, whispered into the ears of family members, and echoed across the gardens where history had been written and rewritten. The tension was palpable. Secrets, once hidden, began to rise to the surface. Harry's revelation didn't happen overnight. It began as a gnawing feeling, a sense that things weren't as they seemed. He noticed subtle shifts, changes in behavior, unexplained absences, and conversations that didn't quite add up. Every instinct he had told him something was wrong. And yet, in a world where appearances mattered more than reality, admitting suspicion was dangerous. To accuse without proof could ruin reputations, destabilize relationships, and set off a media frenzy. But Harry couldn't ignore it. He had to find the truth, no matter the cost. The tension between public image and private turmoil had reached a breaking point. You have to understand the unique pressures Harry faced. Royal life is a gilded cage. Freedom is a luxury few understand, and loyalty is both a blessing and a burden. Imagine standing in a room full of advisors, aides, and family members, and knowing that your every word might be leaked to the press. Imagine the fear of being judged not just by your peers, but by the entire world. Harry lived with that fear daily. And yet, the revelations about Meghan were so extreme that they transcended normal royal protocol. They demanded confrontation, acknowledgement, and action. The family's foundation was cracking, and the cracks were widening by the day. The rumors themselves were staggering. People spoke of secret relationships, alleged betrayals, and actions that went against every expectation of loyalty and love. Every story seemed wilder than the last, and yet each carried a kernel of plausibility. Social gatherings, private events, and exclusive parties suddenly took on a new meaning when viewed through the lens of these allegations. Friends, aides, and even distant relatives began to notice inconsistencies, small, almost imperceptible signs that hinted at a much larger narrative. But until Harry spoke, none of it could be confirmed. The world was left to speculate, and speculation often becomes more explosive than truth. For months, Harry wrestled with what to say and when. Public acknowledgement was not just risky, it was unprecedented. Royals are trained to maintain poise, discretion, and restraint. To break that code is to risk everything: the family, public trust, and one's own sense of self. But Harry had reached a point where silence was no longer an option. The emotional burden, the weight of secrecy, and the sheer magnitude of what he had discovered pressed on him relentlessly. It wasn't just about the rumors anymore. It was about protecting his truth, his integrity, and, ultimately, the future of his family. And that is what brings us here, to this moment. A moment where history is on the verge of being rewritten. Now, consider the human element. The emotions that no article, no headline, no leaked document can fully capture. Imagine feeling betrayed by someone you thought you knew intimately. Imagine the anger, the heartbreak, the sense of disbelief that creeps in when reality diverges so dramatically from expectation. Harry didn't just feel these emotions. He lived them, day in and day out. There were nights of sleepless contemplation, conversations held in hushed tones behind closed doors, and countless moments where the world saw a composed prince, while inside, the turmoil was overwhelming. That dichotomy, the public persona versus private anguish, is central to understanding why Harry decided to finally speak. And yet, there was another layer, the media. In today's world, information spreads at lightning speed. Rumors don't just simmer, they explode. Every leaked message, every photograph, every ambiguous statement carries the potential to become a global headline. For Harry, navigating this landscape was a delicate balancing act. Reveal too much, and the fallout could be catastrophic. Reveal too little, and the rumors continue to fester, unchecked and growing more dangerous by the day. The challenge was immense. How to confirm the truth without inviting chaos. How to speak without irreversibly damaging relationships, reputations, and the fragile structure of the royal family itself. This is where the stakes become even higher. Harry's confirmation isn't just about personal vindication. It's a seismic event that reverberates across generations, institutions, and the global audience. The implications are profound. The monarchy's image, the media's credibility, and the public's perception of a beloved family are all at risk. Every revelation, every detail, every allegation carries the potential to ignite a firestorm that could consume careers, lives, and legacies. And Harry, standing at the epicenter, is both the messenger and the most affected party. He is the bridge between the private reality of the palace and the public fascination that follows. Now, why does this matter today? Why is this story critical, not just for royal enthusiasts, but for anyone who watches power, loyalty, and deception unfold in real time? Because this isn't just a family drama. It's a mirror reflecting society's fascination with truth, betrayal, and the human cost of fame. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition, secrecy, and desire collide. And most importantly, it's a story about consequences. Actions have repercussions, and Harry is finally revealing them, laying them bare for the world to see. His truth is explosive, unavoidable, and, for many, shocking beyond imagination. As you watch this unfold, consider the stakes, the emotions, and the irreversible consequences. Imagine being in Harry's position, forced to reconcile love and loyalty with betrayal and scandal. Imagine navigating a world where every move is scrutinized, every word dissected, and every secret eventually surfaces. And now, imagine finally deciding that enough is enough. That moment has arrived. Harry has chosen to confirm what the world has only whispered about. And what he confirms isn't just shocking, it's transformative. It changes the narrative, the history, and the very perception of a family the world thought it knew. But here's the catch. Even with all the confirmation, not everything is as simple as it seems. There are layers, nuances, and details that continue to emerge. Some are disturbing, some are surprising, and some challenge everything you thought you knew. The journey Harry is about to take us on is not just a recounting of events. It is an unraveling of a narrative carefully constructed over years, a revelation that will force the world to reassess, rethink, and reconsider. And it begins with a single, undeniable truth. The rumors were not baseless. They were a warning, a shadow of what was to come, and now, the truth stands in full light. It started as a whisper, just a faint, almost imperceptible murmur in the corridors of London's most famous palace. But whispers, when left unchecked, grow. They twist. They become something more dangerous than anyone could anticipate. And in the case of Meghan Markle, what began as speculation about her behavior quickly snowballed into full-blown scandal. The world was watching, and the story had only just begun. How could one person, seemingly so charming and sophisticated, ignite such turmoil in one of the oldest royal families in history? That question haunted palace staff, aides, and even family members. Everyone noticed the subtle shifts, the moments when Meghan's presence seemed to bend the room, when conversations stopped, when faces hardened. At first, these were dismissed as misunderstandings, differences in personality, or the natural tension of adapting to royal life. But as time went on, the whispers gained substance. Patterns emerged, and the world began to pay attention. The first rumors didn't originate with tabloids. No, they began behind closed doors. Loyal staff, trusted advisors, and friends close to Harry began noticing inconsistencies, strange behaviors, and unexplained absences. Something didn't add up. People spoke in hushed tones. What they observed didn't match the public persona, the polished, glamorous image the media adored. There were stories of secret outings, of whispered phone calls at odd hours, of private meetings that were never acknowledged in public. Each story alone could be dismissed. Taken together, they formed a pattern that could not be ignored. Social media acted as an accelerant. A single unverified tweet, a fleeting Instagram story, a cryptic comment from a former aide, could ignite flames that burned across the globe. Within hours, the whispers became headlines. Rumors about Meghan sleeping with multiple men, of manipulating those around her, and of attempting to destabilize family relationships circulated relentlessly. Each article, each video, each commentary added another layer to the story. And the palace, always conscious of image, watched nervously as the narrative began to spin out of control. But what made these rumors so potent wasn't just their salacious nature. It was the fact that Harry, for the first time, was quietly observing, quietly listening, quietly questioning everything he thought he knew. Imagine realizing, after years of love, that the person closest to you might not be who they claim to be. The emotional toll was immense. The confusion, the heartbreak, the anger. It all came to a head in private, in rooms where the world would never see. Friends described long nights where Harry would pace the floor, wrestling with conflicting emotions, unsure of how to reconcile love with suspicion. Meanwhile, the palace staff began to leak bits of information. Not all of it intentional, not all of it accurate, but in an environment so tightly controlled, even the smallest hint of controversy becomes a wildfire. There were reports of secret meetings with unknown individuals, late-night phone calls, and behaviors inconsistent with royal expectations. Each news story fueled speculation, and every rumor, no matter how unverified, was amplified by the global fascination with royalty. The stakes weren't just personal, they were public, and the public wanted answers. The contradictions were what made this story irresistible. Publicly, Meghan appeared the epitome of elegance and composure. She was polished, articulate, and seemingly devoted. But behind closed doors, sources whispered of manipulation, of subtle undermining of family dynamics, and of a desire for control that went beyond the ordinary. Every detail painted a portrait that was at once fascinating and disturbing. And Harry, caught between his love for her and his loyalty to his family, found himself trapped in a storm he couldn't escape. What drove the rumors further was the context of Harry's life. As a royal, he was under constant scrutiny. His choices, his words, his friendships, they were all monitored. Now imagine having to navigate a personal crisis under that microscope. Every expression, every glance, every emotional response is analyzed, judged, and critiqued. And when the rumors about Meghan began to surface publicly, the pressure mounted exponentially. Harry was not just dealing with betrayal. He was dealing with the weight of the world watching his every move. And yet, despite the swirling chaos, there were people who doubted. Friends, media commentators, and even palace insiders questioned the validity of the rumors. Could someone really cause this much disruption? Was it possible that years of observation and whispered warnings were exaggerations, misinterpretations, or misunderstandings? Harry himself wrestled with these questions. He wanted proof, tangible evidence, confirmation that went beyond gossip and innuendo. And what he discovered would eventually confirm the very worst fears he had harbored. The rumors also took a very personal toll. Harry's relationships with his family members became strained. Brothers, cousins, and even distant relatives noticed tension in private conversations, during formal events, and at family gatherings. The once solid network of trust began to show cracks. How do you reconcile love for a partner with loyalty to a family? How do you maintain composure when the stories you hear are so shocking, so devastating, and yet so plausible? These were questions Harry had to answer daily. And each passing day without resolution made the whispers grow louder. Media coverage added another layer of pressure. Every journalist knew that if the story was true, it would become the biggest royal scandal in decades. Leaks, anonymous sources, and speculative reporting kept the story alive, even when facts were scarce. Some reports were accurate, some wildly exaggerated, but the cumulative effect was clear. The world was hungry for confirmation, and Harry was the only one who could provide it. His silence, once protective, became increasingly untenable. Even the most mundane details became fodder for speculation. A private dinner, a brief trip, or an unannounced meeting was dissected, reinterpreted, and spun into a narrative of manipulation and betrayal. Every action, every word, was scrutinized. In this environment, it was nearly impossible to separate fact from fiction, and yet, Harry was determined to uncover the truth. Not just for himself, but for the sake of his family and his own sense of integrity. But the most astonishing part of all these rumors was the consistency with which they resurfaced. Despite denials, despite attempts to suppress information, new sources always emerged. Former aides, acquaintances, and even casual observers contributed to a growing mountain of evidence. And as the stories accumulated, they began to form a coherent, undeniable pattern. Harry realized that the rumors weren't just stories, they were warnings, and ignoring them could have devastating consequences. Finally, the moment came when Harry could no longer sit in silence. The pressure, the evidence, and the emotional weight of the rumors forced him to confront the truth head-on. It wasn't just about proving the whispers true. It was about protecting himself, his family, and, most importantly, ensuring that the reality of the situation was acknowledged before it spiraled further out of control. And when he spoke, the world listened. But even with all this context, the full truth of what Harry would reveal remained a mystery. The rumors, shocking as they were, only scratched the surface. There were deeper secrets, more explosive revelations, and emotional truths that would rock the foundations of the family. And as Harry prepared to speak, one thing became clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The rumors had started quietly. They had grown into a storm. And now, with Harry ready to confirm them, the entire world was about to witness a revelation that would shatter assumptions, rewrite history, and leave everyone questioning what they thought they knew. But what Harry would reveal next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. But what Harry would reveal next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. In a private room, far from the cameras, the press, and the endless chatter of courtiers, Harry finally allowed himself to speak. Not in carefully measured public statements, not in rehearsed interviews, but in raw, unfiltered honesty. The weight of years, the burden of secrecy, and the fear of shattering his family's image all collided in that moment. And as he began, his words carried the gravity of someone who had reached the edge of endurance. "People think they know her," he said, his voice low but resolute. "But they have no idea." Those words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Friends who were present later recalled the tension in the room, the sharp intake of breath from everyone listening. Harry didn't need to embellish. The truth, in its pure form, was already shocking. He spoke of feelings betrayed, of loyalty tested, and of love stretched to its breaking point. This wasn't a man recounting gossip. This was a man exposing the reality that had been concealed for too long. He described moments that, to the outside world, might have seemed trivial. Whispered phone calls in the middle of the night, sudden trips without explanation, and a pattern of behavior that seemed carefully orchestrated. But for Harry, these moments were signs, clues in a puzzle that had taken years to piece together. It wasn't just one thing, he explained. It was everything combined. The secrecy, the manipulation, the way she played people against each other without them ever realizing it. The gravity of his words left no doubt. This was not a simple misunderstanding. It was a pattern, one that had profound implications for the family and for his own emotional well-being. The confession didn't come without hesitation. Harry paused often, the weight of the revelation almost too much to bear. There were moments when he questioned whether speaking would do more harm than good. But the alternative, silence, was no longer acceptable. Every day he remained quiet. The tension grew, the rumors intensified, and the emotional toll increased. He had reached the point where truth was not just necessary, it was urgent. And so he spoke. He spoke of betrayal, not the kind one reads about in novels, where deceit is abstract and distant. No, This was intimate, personal, and cutting. When you trust someone with your life, he said, you expect honesty. You expect love. You expect loyalty. But when that trust is broken, it's devastating. The words resonated, heavy with emotion, as if each syllable carried the weight of years of private anguish. Those in the room felt it too, a tangible wave of heartbreak and disbelief that settled over everyone present. Harry's confession also touched on the impact of these revelations on his family. He described the strain on relationships, the silent tensions at family gatherings, and the emotional distance that had crept in over time. Cousins, siblings, and advisors all noticed changes, subtle but undeniable. Conversations became measured, smiles forced, and gestures cautious. The palace, known for its decorum, began to feel brittle. And in that fragile environment, Harry's decision to speak was both courageous and dangerous. But what truly shocked those present were the specific details he disclosed. He spoke of alleged multiple relationships, of actions that contradicted the image the public had been fed, and of manipulations that went beyond ordinary marital strife. Each revelation added layers to a narrative that had been whispered for years but never confirmed. The room was silent as the weight of these disclosures sank in. Friends and aides exchanged glances, realizing that the stories circulating in tabloids were not only true, they were an understatement. He paused to reflect on the emotional toll. It's not just about betrayal, Harry said. It's about understanding who someone really is. It's about reconciling love with truth. And sometimes, that truth is unbearable. The room, already tense, seemed to shrink under the intensity of his words. Emotions ran high. Anger, sorrow, disbelief. The very idea that someone could be so calculated, so manipulative, was almost impossible to grasp. And yet, Harry's detailed recounting left no doubt. Audience questions lingered unspoken. How could someone maintain such a facade for so long? What motivated these actions? And perhaps most importantly, why hadn't anyone seen it before? Harry's confession offered partial answers, but it also raised more questions than it solved. That, in itself, was part of the drama. Human nature is drawn to complexity, to contradictions, and to stories where nothing is as it seems. Harry understood this, and he used it, revealing enough to shock, but leaving room for curiosity to grow, for questions to linger, and for speculation to flourish. He also addressed the personal consequences. Emotional exhaustion, sleepless nights, and the constant pressure of public scrutiny took a toll on him. Yet even amid this turmoil, he found clarity. He had to speak, he had to confront the reality, and he had to protect those who mattered most. The confession was not a cry for sympathy. It was a declaration of truth. Every detail he shared was calculated, intentional, and necessary for setting the record straight. The room listened as Harry recounted the moments that defined his private struggle. Arguments that left him shaken, subtle betrayals that chipped away at trust, and decisions that forced him to reevaluate his understanding of love and loyalty. He described the emotional labyrinth he had navigated, one filled with fear, anger, and heartbreak. It was a portrait of a man grappling with unimaginable circumstances, one whose life had been upended by revelations that few could comprehend. And yet, amid the darkness, there were glimmers of hope and resilience. Harry spoke of the strength he drew from his family, from his closest friends, and from the unwavering desire to protect his children from the fallout. He acknowledged the pain, but he also conveyed a sense of determination. Speaking the truth, he realized, was not only necessary for himself, but essential for the legacy of the family and for the clarity of history. He didn't shy away from the consequences of his words. Harry understood that by confessing, he risked backlash, media vilification, and further scandal. The world would react, the tabloids would pounce, and social media would erupt. Yet he weighed this against the alternative: continued deception, ongoing manipulation, and the erosion of personal and familial integrity. The decision to speak was deliberate, courageous, and, above all, authentic. As the confession drew to a close, a chilling realization settled over those present. The rumors were not merely whispers of intrigue. They were truths, painful and undeniable, that had been hidden in plain sight. Harry's willingness to confirm them shattered illusions, forced reevaluation, and set the stage for unprecedented public scrutiny. The moment was historic, personal, and devastatingly impactful. But even after this confession, there was more, layers of revelation that had yet to be disclosed. Details so explosive that they could not only disrupt family dynamics, but potentially reshape the public's perception of an entire royal lineage. The room held its collective breath, knowing that the next revelation would be even more shocking than what had already been revealed. And Harry, with a calmness that belied the storm within, prepared to expose what no one had dared speak aloud before. Because the truth, as he was about to make clear, was far deeper, far more complex, and far more devastating than anyone could have imagined. And the world would soon learn, in real time, that some stories are so explosive, so intricately tangled, that once they are told, nothing, and no one, remains untouched. And when they did, the consequences would ripple through the palace, the media, and the world in ways that no one could predict. Behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, a storm was brewing, one that would test the very fabric of the royal family. The elegance, poise, and perfection carefully cultivated over centuries began to crack under pressure. It was as if a hidden earthquake had struck, leaving tremors of distrust, anger, and confusion reverberating through every corridor, every drawing room, and every hallway. No one was untouched. The first signs of turmoil were subtle. Small interactions, once casual and cordial, became loaded with tension. Conversations were measured, polite smiles forced, and laughter seemed hollow. Staff members whispered among themselves, exchanging uneasy glances. Courtiers began to notice the invisible line drawn between those who knew the truth and those who were left guessing. The palace, a symbol of stability, suddenly felt fragile, brittle even, as if a single wrong word could ignite a conflagration. Family members were among the first to feel the emotional impact. Harry's siblings, cousins, and even distant relatives sensed the shift. The unspoken questions hung heavy in the air. What does Harry know that we don't? How much of this is true? And most importantly, how do we protect ourselves from being caught in the fallout? These questions created an invisible tension, a quiet unease that made ordinary gatherings feel like delicate negotiations rather than moments of familial bonding. The emotional toll was profound. Reports from insiders revealed long nights of whispered arguments, private confrontations, and tears shed behind closed doors. The once unified family began to fracture along subtle lines of loyalty and doubt. Some members sympathized with Harry, seeing his pain as justified and his revelations necessary. Others clung to skepticism, questioning whether these allegations could truly be accurate, afraid that confirming them would destroy the family's public image. It was a delicate balancing act, with trust fraying at every turn. One aide described a private dinner where the tension was so palpable that the clinking of silverware sounded like a drumbeat of anxiety. Every glance, every word, every gesture was weighed and measured. The slightest misstep could trigger an emotional cascade, and everyone present felt the strain. What had once been natural familial warmth now required careful choreography, like walking on a tightrope over a pit of potential scandal. The impact extended beyond formal gatherings. Even routine interactions, like morning briefings or casual walks in the palace gardens, became fraught with emotion. Harry's presence carried an unspoken gravity, a reminder that he held knowledge that could destabilize the delicate equilibrium. Family members found themselves navigating a landscape where every word, every action, every decision could be misinterpreted, or worse, become a weapon in the escalating conflict. And then there was the public dimension. The rumors, already pervasive, were now reinforced by Harry's private confirmations. Even within the palace, whispers reached the ears of aides who, in turn, relayed fragments to the media. The situation became a powder keg, with the outside world primed to react to every subtle sign of discord. Headlines speculated endlessly, social media exploded with conjecture, and the family felt the weight of global scrutiny pressing in from all directions. It was impossible to maintain the illusion of normalcy. The personal toll was equally devastating. Relationships once built on trust began to erode. Siblings argued over the best way to respond to the revelations. Cousins debated the accuracy of the rumors. Even close friends struggled to mediate, caught between loyalty to Harry and concern for the family's public reputation. The emotional landscape was treacherous, and navigating it required constant vigilance, diplomacy, and an almost impossible level of restraint. And yet, amidst this chaos, moments of raw vulnerability emerged. Harry himself was not immune to the emotional strain. He found himself reflecting on the years spent trying to balance love for Meghan with loyalty to his family. Every revelation, every confirmation, was a dagger through the heart of his perception of family unity. Nights were spent in restless contemplation, wrestling with guilt, anger, and sorrow. He questioned whether speaking the truth was worth the inevitable fallout. But the alternative, remaining silent, felt like complicity in deception. The palace staff also felt the pressure. Secretive corridors, once places of routine movement and protocol, became arenas of tension. Servants and aides whispered anxiously, wondering what the next revelation would bring. Who would be implicated? Who could be trusted? The uncertainty created a climate of fear, suspicion, and hyper-awareness, where even innocuous actions were scrutinized for hidden meaning. And then there were the confrontations. Private, emotional meetings between family members grew increasingly intense. Heated arguments erupted over the interpretation of events, the credibility of rumors, and the appropriate response. Some relatives urged caution, advocating for silence and discretion. Others demanded action, insisting that Harry's revelations needed to be addressed publicly to prevent further damage. Each argument revealed the fault lines that had been hidden beneath decades of polished appearances and ceremonial decorum. The emotional stakes were high, and the consequences far-reaching. Families are complex, and royal families exponentially so. There was not just the personal dimension of betrayal and mistrust, but also the public dimension of reputation, legacy, and historical scrutiny. Every decision, every action, every word had the potential to alter the perception of the monarchy for generations. And Harry, holding the truth, stood at the center of this storm. Even amidst the turmoil, some moments of tenderness surfaced. Family members attempted to maintain normalcy, sharing brief, cautious smiles, engaging in polite conversation, and clinging to memories of better days. But these moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the knowledge that beneath the surface, the family's cohesion was being tested in ways few had ever imagined. Emotional exhaustion became the new normal, as every interaction carried the weight of potential revelation, every silence hinted at unspoken truths, and every gesture was scrutinized for hidden intent. And then came the leaks, small, deliberate, and damaging. Sensitive information, shared with outsiders or inadvertently revealed, began circulating. The media pounced, transforming private turmoil into public spectacle. Tabloids printed speculation as fact. Social media amplified every rumor, and commentators debated endlessly over Harry's private struggle and Meghan's alleged actions. The family was thrust into the global spotlight not as a symbol of stability, but as a source of scandal. The tension escalated further when internal divisions became more pronounced. Some family members rallied around Harry, seeing the need for honesty and transparency. Others prioritized protection of public image, fearing the destruction of decades of carefully maintained reputation. The conflict was not just about truth, it was about values, priorities, and the preservation of legacy. The palace, long regarded as a bastion of order and protocol, had become a theater of human emotion in its most raw, unfiltered form. Even the youngest members of the family were affected. Children sensed tension, absorbed unspoken anxiety, and reacted to subtle changes in atmosphere. Harry, acutely aware of this, struggled with the responsibility of shielding them while confronting truths that could not remain hidden. The emotional burden of his decisions weighed heavily, as every choice had ripple effects that extended far beyond himself. And yet, for all the turmoil, Harry remained steadfast. He understood that truth, once revealed, could not be undone. He knew that his confirmation of rumors would trigger waves of reaction, but he also recognized the necessity of transparency. The family's cohesion might be tested, trust might be strained, but the reality of the situation demanded acknowledgement. Behind closed doors, the palace continued to feel the effects of the revelations. Conversations became more guarded, alliances shifted, and loyalties were questioned. Every day brought new challenges, new rumors, and new moments of tension. The family's ability to navigate this period of crisis would define not only their personal relationships, but also the monarchy's reputation in the eyes of the world. And just when it seemed that the palace had reached the limits of its endurance, another shock arrived. A new revelation, more explosive than any before, emerged from Harry's private knowledge, one that would challenge every assumption, test every relationship, and push the family to the brink. It was a revelation that no one expected, and when it came to light, it would change everything. Because in this storm of secrets, rumors, and betrayal, the family in turmoil had only just begun to confront the full scope of the truth. And the next disclosure, the one Harry was poised to reveal, would leave everyone, family, staff, and the world, reeling. And the next disclosure, the one Harry was poised to reveal, would leave everyone, family, staff, and the world, reeling. It was a truth that no one had anticipated, a revelation buried under layers of secrecy and subtle deception. Harry had spent years piecing together the fragments, observing patterns, and quietly gathering evidence. What he uncovered was shocking, not just because of the details, but because of the betrayal it represented. Behind the polished public image, Meghan's private life told a very different story. A story filled with hidden relationships, clandestine encounters, and secrets that threatened to dismantle everything Harry had held dear. Imagine discovering that someone you loved, someone you trusted completely, had cultivated an entirely separate life, one that existed in parallel to the one you shared. Every date, every social event, every intimate moment you thought was exclusive was potentially part of a much larger, hidden narrative. For Harry, the realization was devastating. The very foundation of trust, the pillar of love and loyalty, had been shaken to its core. And in that quiet palace room, he prepared to confront the reality head-on. The hidden relationships weren't merely rumors. They were patterns, carefully concealed, yet discernible to those who looked closely. Friends and former associates began to speak, revealing glimpses of encounters, private meetings, and ambiguous interactions that suggested more than met the eye. Each account, corroborated by another, formed a mosaic of behavior that could not be ignored. Harry knew that confirming these patterns publicly would create shockwaves, yet he also recognized the necessity. Truth, however uncomfortable, demanded acknowledgement. He described the secrecy with precision. The late-night messages, the carefully orchestrated trips, the selective transparency, all pointed to a life layered with duplicity. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. And for Harry, the emotional sting was magnified by the realization that those around him, who had advised caution, had often been kept in the dark, manipulated by the very person he had once loved unconditionally. The betrayal was both personal and insidious, seeping into every corner of his private world. The accounts were staggering. Friends spoke of social gatherings where Meghan's interactions seemed calculated, of whispered phone calls at odd hours, of meetings that were carefully cloaked in plausible deniability. Observers described a pattern of behavior that suggested a level of intentionality beyond ordinary marital disputes. And Harry, piecing these accounts together, could no longer ignore the truth. It was as if he had been living in parallel realities, one public, one private. And the private reality was far darker than anyone had imagined. Imagine the complexity of navigating such a revelation. For Harry, it wasn't merely about anger or betrayal. It was about understanding the full scope of deception. Every encounter, every hidden relationship had implications. Who else was involved? How long had it been going on? And what did this mean for the integrity of the family and for his own future? These were not questions with simple answers. They required careful reflection, emotional fortitude, and an unwavering commitment to uncovering truth. The emotional beats were intense. Friends recalled nights where Harry would confront the implications of what he had learned, pacing the floor, wrestling with conflicting emotions. Love, loyalty, and betrayal collided within him. He questioned his judgment, his ability to read character, and his own decisions. How could someone he loved and trusted so completely maintain such a hidden life? And more importantly, how could he protect himself, his children, and his family from the fallout? The weight of these questions was almost unbearable. Yet, amidst the heartbreak, there was clarity. Harry realized that ignoring the truth would be more damaging than confronting it. He understood that hidden relationships were not merely private indiscretions. They were disruptive forces, capable of undermining family cohesion, public perception, and his own sense of self. The need to speak, to confirm, and to address the reality of these relationships became urgent. Silence was no longer an option. The revelations also exposed contradictions that only intensified the emotional shock. Publicly, Meghan maintained an image of sophistication, loyalty, and charm. Privately, the actions observed by insiders told a different story, one of secrecy, manipulation, and carefully concealed interactions. The dissonance between appearance and reality created tension not only for Harry but for those around him. How could someone reconcile these two versions of the same person? How could love coexist with betrayal, trust coexist with deception? These contradictions were at the heart of the turmoil. As the truth began to surface, the ripple effects were immediate. Family members, long accustomed to appearances and protocol, began to question what they had observed. Staff members recalled moments they had previously dismissed as minor or irrelevant, now seeing them in a new, troubling light. Friends and acquaintances started connecting dots they had ignored or misinterpreted. The hidden relationships, once whispers, became undeniable threads woven into a larger, more complex tapestry of behavior. Harry's observations were meticulous. He recounted the patterns with clarity, noting how small incidents, seemingly insignificant in isolation, formed a larger, coherent narrative when viewed collectively. Each encounter, each secretive action, each calculated interaction was a piece of a puzzle. And as the pieces came together, the picture that emerged was as heartbreaking as it was shocking. Yet, even with the confirmation of hidden relationships, Harry wrestled with nuance. He acknowledged that human behavior is complex and that people make mistakes. He understood that love, desire, and vulnerability can lead to choices that are not always rational or fair. But the pattern he had observed was not accidental. It was intentional, persistent, and deeply disruptive. The emotional impact on him, his children, and the family could not be overstated. Audience engagement was implicit in every moment. As Harry recounted these details, one couldn't help but ask, what would you do if someone you trusted completely led a secret life? How far would you go to uncover the truth? At what point does love give way to self-preservation? These questions are uncomfortable, yet they lie at the heart of the drama. And for Harry, the answers were painful and unavoidable. The consequences of these hidden relationships were far-reaching. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. Family dynamics, already delicate, became even more strained. Relationships that had seemed solid were suddenly fraught with uncertainty. And the public, hungry for sensational details, reacted with fascination, outrage, and speculation. The palace, traditionally a symbol of stability, now faced scrutiny not only from the press, but from an audience eager to dissect every revelation. And yet, despite the emotional chaos, there was a sense of determination in Harry. He understood that the truth, no matter how painful, needed to be acknowledged. The hidden relationships could not remain buried, and the impact on the family, the monarchy, and his own life demanded transparency. Speaking publicly was a calculated risk, but it was necessary to preserve integrity and confront the reality head-on. But as the world braced for confirmation, there was more to the story. Details that were even more explosive, even more destabilizing than the hidden relationships themselves. People often underestimate the ripple effects of betrayal. In Harry's case, these were not just private indiscretions. They were actions that reverberated through the family, the palace, and the public consciousness. And when these next revelations came to light, they would force everyone to reassess everything they thought they knew about loyalty, love, and deception. And what came next, more shocking, more personal, and more explosive, would leave everyone, from the palace staff to the global public, reeling. It was the duality of Meghan Markle that created the deepest fractures, the sharpest contradictions, and the most profound sense of betrayal. Publicly, she was the epitome of grace, charm, and sophistication. She smiled flawlessly for the cameras, delivered eloquent speeches, and embodied the kind of modern, globalized royalty the world had been eager to embrace. Yet privately, according to multiple insiders and confirmed by Harry himself, the reality was a stark contrast. A woman whose actions behind closed doors were calculated, secretive, and, at times, manipulative. Imagine the cognitive dissonance this created for Harry. The woman he married, the person he trusted with his heart and his life, appeared one way to the world, but another entirely in private. It wasn't just about deception, it was about the profound gap between appearance and reality. Staff members reported instances where Meghan would engage warmly in public settings, only for those same staff members to witness cold dismissals, subtle manipulations, or pointed criticisms in private. Each incident was a jarring reminder that the image cultivated for the public eye was a careful performance. Observers described her as a master of duality. Public events were carefully staged, orchestrated down to the last detail. Every smile, every gesture, every word was calculated to maintain a flawless image. Interviews were rehearsed, philanthropic appearances were strategically timed, and interactions with high-profile figures were curated to enhance perception. But in private, the same sources said, Meghan often acted with a surprising level of control, bending situations and people to her will. The contrast was unsettling, and for Harry, it became impossible to ignore. One particularly illustrative example involved a major charity gala. In public, Meghan was warm, engaged, and radiating empathy. Cameras captured her every gesture. Commentators praised her charm, and the world lauded her commitment to philanthropy. Behind the scenes, however, staff revealed, she had allegedly been micromanaging the event, criticizing decisions, and ensuring that her vision dominated every aspect of the evening. The public saw a benevolent figure. Insiders saw meticulous control and strategic calculation. This duality was emblematic of the pattern Harry had begun to recognize, a carefully constructed persona masking a more complex and troubling private reality. This duality wasn't just professional. It extended into the most intimate aspects of life. Friends and confidants reported inconsistencies in Meghan's interactions with family and staff. Moments of affection were punctuated by episodes of manipulation or secrecy. Casual conversations were laced with underlying tension, and small slights, sometimes almost imperceptible, created ripples of emotional turbulence. For Harry, witnessing these patterns in private while being aware of her public image created a profound sense of isolation. He was living in a world of contradictions, unsure of where the truth began and the performance ended. The emotional weight of this duality was staggering. Harry described long nights of reflection, where the discrepancy between public perception and private reality gnawed at him. He questioned his own judgment. How had he missed the signs? How had he trusted so completely without recognizing the underlying pattern? And perhaps most painfully, he grappled with the realization that the public, enchanted by her image, would likely dismiss the private truths as rumor or exaggeration. The betrayal, therefore, was compounded, not only by deception, but by the impossibility of convincing the world of its existence. Audience engagement here is unavoidable. Consider how difficult it is to reconcile appearances with reality in your own life. Have you ever trusted someone only to discover a private persona you didn't anticipate? How would you navigate a world where the person you love projects one identity publicly while concealing another in private? For Harry, this wasn't a philosophical exercise. It was a lived, visceral experience with consequences that reached into every corner of his personal and professional life. The contradictions extended to social interactions beyond the palace. Friends and acquaintances noted discrepancies between public statements and private behavior. Stories emerged of situations where Meghan would present herself as supportive, compassionate, or aligned with a particular cause publicly, while privately undermining those same efforts or engaging in behavior that contradicted her stated values. The dissonance was not subtle. It was pervasive, a pattern that could not be dismissed as coincidence or misunderstanding. Harry's reflections also highlighted the psychological strain of maintaining dual awareness. To love someone deeply while observing repeated contradictions between their public and private selves is emotionally exhausting. Trust becomes a fragile construct, loyalty is tested, and the very foundation of intimacy is threatened. Harry spoke candidly about the isolation this created. He couldn't share these insights freely. The implications were too explosive, the impact on the family and public image too severe. Yet suppressing the truth felt equally dangerous. Insiders also reported that Meghan's duality created friction within the palace itself. Staff members were often caught between following protocol and responding to shifting private dynamics. Advisors struggled to reconcile public events with private interactions, leading to miscommunications, tension, and even fear. Every action required careful navigation. Every decision could ignite conflict. The palace, traditionally a bastion of order, found itself grappling with emotional unpredictability fueled by the contrast between Meghan's public and private selves. The media, of course, compounded the dilemma. Headlines praised Meghan's poise and charm while ignoring or dismissing reports from insiders. Social media amplified her public image, creating a feedback loop that reinforced perception rather than reality. For Harry, this created an almost Kafkaesque scenario. The world revered a version of his wife that he knew was incomplete, while the true nature of her private actions remained hidden, creating tension not only at home, but in the public sphere. The emotional consequences of this duality were profound. Harry described feeling trapped between defending his family and confronting the truth of his marriage. Every day, he faced the challenge of balancing love, loyalty, and responsibility against the emerging reality of hidden behavior. The pressure was relentless. Decisions had to be made, disclosures carefully timed, and emotional energy constantly managed. Friends recalled the toll it took on him, the moments of doubt, anger, and heartbreak that defined a private struggle invisible to the public eye. And yet, amidst the turmoil, Harry began to find clarity. The duality, while painful, revealed the necessity of transparency. If the truth was not acknowledged, the emotional and relational damage would continue unchecked. Silence, in this context, became complicity. Speaking out, confirming the realities behind the carefully curated public persona, was not just a moral imperative. It was a protective measure for the family, the institution, and himself. But even with this clarity, the tension between public and private selves would remain a central conflict. Meghan's duality wasn't merely a quirk. It was a recurring theme, a pattern that shaped interactions, decisions, and perceptions. Every revelation added complexity, creating a narrative that was as compelling as it was heartbreaking. The public adored a persona that concealed troubling behavior, while Harry lived daily with the reality that the person he had loved was far more complicated and far more secretive than anyone could have imagined. And just when it seemed that the private truth had been fully revealed, another layer emerged. Reports surfaced of actions that went beyond duality, hinting at manipulation, deception, and emotional maneuvering that had previously gone unnoticed. Staff members, advisors, and friends contributed new details, each piece adding to a growing picture that was at once shocking and tragically believable. The public, unaware of these layers, continued to revere the persona. Harry, burdened with truth, realized that the chasm between perception and reality was wider than ever. Because in this story, public perception and private reality were not just different. They were oppositional forces, colliding in ways that created chaos, heartbreak, and uncertainty. And as the revelations continued, it became clear the next disclosures, the ones Harry would confront, would further illuminate the gap, forcing the family, the palace, and the world to confront truths that were long overdue. The stage was set for revelations that would test loyalty, challenge assumptions, and redefine what it meant to trust someone. Harry, having navigated the treacherous waters of duality, now faced the next challenge, exposing hidden manipulations, confronting deception, and preparing for a fallout that would ripple through every corner of his life. Because even after years of whispers, rumors, and private turmoil, the story was far from over. And what came next? The consequences, the confessions, and the exposures would be more explosive than anything previously revealed. And what came next, the consequences, the confessions, and the exposures, would be more explosive than anything previously revealed. For Harry, the breaking point came not with a single event, but as the culmination of years of secrecy, emotional strain, and mounting evidence. The palace, the public, and even close family members had become complicit in a delicate dance of appearances, but behind the closed doors, the emotional toll on Harry was unbearable. Every day, every interaction, every whispered rumor pushed him closer to a point where silence was no longer an option. He had always been a man of loyalty. Loyalty to his family, loyalty to his wife, and loyalty to the monarchy had guided his actions. But loyalty is a fragile thing when confronted with repeated deception. Harry found himself questioning everything: the people he trusted, the decisions he had made, and the reality he had accepted. Friends recall nights when he would sit alone in his private quarters, staring into the darkness, grappling with the unbearable weight of conflicting emotions. Love and betrayal, hope and despair, loyalty and truth. They were all intertwined, creating a tension that threatened to snap at any moment. The breaking point, insiders say, came after a series of revelations that made the rumors impossible to ignore. Small inconsistencies that had once seemed trivial coalesced into a pattern that could no longer be denied. Alleged hidden relationships, manipulative actions, and strategic secrecy formed a mosaic that painted a picture of betrayal so comprehensive that Harry could no longer maintain the facade of ignorance. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The woman he had trusted with his heart and the future of his family had been living a life parallel to the one he thought they shared. Emotionally, it was devastating. Harry described feeling like a man trapped between two worlds: the public world, where Meghan was celebrated and adored, and the private world, where her actions undermined the very foundation of his personal life. The cognitive dissonance was crushing. How could the same person embody both extremes? How could love coexist with deception? These questions haunted him, making every day a struggle for balance, composure, and clarity. Friends and aides described the moment when Harry reached his emotional breaking point. It was during a late-night conversation in his private quarters, away from cameras and courtiers. The air was thick with tension. Harry, exhausted from months of internal conflict, finally allowed himself to voice the full extent of his frustration, anger, and heartbreak. The words were raw, unfiltered, and filled with the emotional weight of someone who had carried a secret too long. "I can't do this anymore," he reportedly said. "I can't live with the lies, the secrecy, the constant manipulation. It's destroying me from the inside out." The emotional stakes extended beyond personal heartbreak. Harry was acutely aware of the impact on his children, the family's reputation, and the broader monarchy. He realized that continued silence could perpetuate harm, both to those he loved and to the institution he had sworn to protect. The pressure was relentless, a constant reminder that every decision carried consequences far beyond the immediate moment. Choosing to speak was not just an emotional necessity. It was a moral imperative. The breaking point was also defined by isolation. As Harry grappled with the revelations, he found that few could truly understand the magnitude of his experience. Advisors offered counsel, friends provided support, but the unique combination of love, betrayal, and public scrutiny was impossible to fully convey. He was alone in the most profound sense, carrying the weight of truth that others could only glimpse. The isolation intensified the emotional strain, making the eventual confession both inevitable and necessary. As he navigated this personal crisis, Harry also confronted the contradictions inherent in his life. Publicly, Meghan was admired, celebrated, and embraced by media and fans alike. Privately, the evidence of betrayal and manipulation grew clearer with each passing day. The contrast between perception and reality became unbearable. How could he reconcile the public image with the private truth? How could he maintain love for someone whose actions caused such devastation? The questions offered no easy answers, only further emotional turbulence. Friends noted that the breaking point manifested in both emotional outbursts and moments of introspection. Harry would oscillate between rage and sorrow, between confrontation and retreat. Some nights were spent arguing in private, attempting to understand motives, intentions, and consequences. Other nights were silent, contemplative, filled with the ache of a love that had been compromised. Each moment reinforced the necessity of disclosure, even as the personal cost remained painfully high. The breaking point also forced Harry to make difficult choices. How much to reveal, when to reveal it, and to whom. The timing of disclosure became critical. Too soon, and the fallout could be catastrophic. Too late, and the damage might become irreversible. Harry's careful deliberation reflected the gravity of the situation. He understood that his actions would not only affect personal relationships, but also the global perception of the royal family. The stakes could not have been higher. Insiders also highlight the emotional paradox Harry faced. Speaking out would protect him and affirm the truth, but it would also invite scrutiny, criticism, and public judgment. Remaining silent would shield the public image but allow manipulation, deception, and betrayal to continue unchecked. He had to weigh the immediate consequences against the long-term emotional, familial, and moral impact. Every choice was fraught, every decision critical. Friends recall moments when Harry would pause mid-conversation, overwhelmed by the enormity of the truth he carried. Tears were shed privately, anger vented in solitude, and reflection became an essential coping mechanism. The intensity of emotion was compounded by the awareness that the world would never fully comprehend the private turmoil he endured. The public knew only fragments, snippets, and selective narratives, never the full scope of emotional devastation. But in that breaking point, clarity emerged. Harry recognized that confronting the reality, exposing the hidden truths, and speaking openly were the only paths forward. He could not continue to live in a world of half-truths and secrets. The breaking point was not just an emotional collapse. It was a turning point, the moment when silence could no longer be tolerated and honesty became imperative. And as he prepared to act, the world remained unaware of the storm about to be unleashed. The breaking point was only the beginning. The disclosures that followed would test family bonds, challenge public perception, and redefine